you guys know, I'm going to be recording this because I have a volunteer who we really want to get to Purple Paw, so we're going to record this so that she can watch it later. And for all our Purple Paw presentations, we do have a handling portion afterwards for volunteers and for staff members who are coming into Mission Hills. We're going to work to set up times so that you guys can work with me or another member of the behavior team so that you can start working with our purple and blue paw dogs and get to know them. So I'm going to do screen sharing here. We're going to start the Purple Paw training. All right. Perfect. All right, can everyone see the screen? You'll have to unmute for a second.
Yes. Yes.
Great. Perfect. All right. Got it. Okay. So, for our volunteers, requirements for Purple Paw training, they have to have taken the very first dog handling training. So when they first come in, we do training where we just kind of show them around the center, how things work, how to clean kennels, how to do laundry, all of the basic stuff so they can help with cleaning. And then they take dog handling training, which is basically just preparing them for brown paw. They have to take the body language class, which we now offer online during COVID, when we may continue to do that in the future. And that has a quiz as well. We have shy paw training, brown paw training, which has a handling portion afterwards that they have to be approved for, and the reactivity presentation, which is now also online. So if you haven't seen the body language class in a while, if it's been a while since you've seen that, that's available online, and so is the reactivity presentation. So if you've never seen that, that's available online as well. So just let us know and we can share that with you. They have to have had 5 hours as an orange paw volunteer, so that's not including classes, that's just helping out around the center before they can do the brown paw, and then 10 hours of handling as a brown paw volunteer. Those were recently reduced hourly requirements just because we don't have a ton of brown paw dogs for them to actually work with most of the time, so we want to encourage people to move up to Purple Paw as soon as they feel comfortable. And some people don't make it to that level. We do have some volunteers that, have to remain as brown paw. And we do have options for some volunteers in special circumstances to just work with like shy paw. And if we happen to have a really easy dog around, then we technically have a yellow paw designation that we have not used yet. But if we happen to have like a really easy, like old senior or easy small dog or something, they might be designated as that. Once a volunteer is Purple Paw, that's when they're allowed to take the dogs for walks around the block. Brown Paw volunteers are not allowed to take the dogs off-site at all. They have to exit and take the dogs out through the little volunteer treat and toy station area, rather than exiting out the door that goes into the volunteer parking lot. They are allowed to participate in the Adventure Buddy program once they're Purple Paw, which means they can take the dogs for off-site adventures and sleepovers. Right now, because of COVID, that's limited to car rides and visits to the volunteer's house only, which needs to be secure and they need to be kept separate from other pets. So they also learn as Purple Paws new handling techniques and how to use different kinds of equipment. And then they get their purple lanyard if they're approved after the handling portion of the training. There we go. So our walking route is one loop around the block in one direction. So everyone goes the same way. Very rarely would anyone go around the block more than once. It's a decent loop. They should only be turning around and going the other way if there's some kind of danger or impediment. They should always be keeping a short leash, paying attention to their surroundings. You know, if there's members of the public around, they should be giving extra space and using barriers when it's safe to do so. So if that means, you know, stepping into the street and using cars as a barrier, they should do that. And then if they're kind of stuck and someone needs to pass, they need to step in between the dog and the person and keep the dog close. And we do have that it says Blue Paw walks between 6 and 9 p.m. That's not something that we really enforce, like Blue Paw's only going around the block 6 to 9. But that is something that comes up a little bit more in winter when it gets dark earlier. We don't want to have too many dogs out at night. And would prefer that, especially once it gets dark, it's just the Blue Paws going around the block and not a whole bunch of volunteers. And then we have an emergency number, which is printed on their lanyards as well. So the typical walker on the block, which if you guys have been working at the center, you're probably aware of already, is going out the volunteer parking lot, making a right, and then making a right again at the park and where the mortuary is. Right now, the mortuary has asked that we keep the dogs off of their grass. So volunteers are allowed to cross the street and spend some time in the grass in the public park area. If they want their dogs to hang out in the grass for a little bit, and then coming back around. If someone wants to jog with the dogs, they can go a little bit further, go past the park. A lot of volunteers will do this if they want to give the dog a little bit of a longer walk. Obviously, we don't want them to do it when it's too hot or when it's like getting really dark out. You know, if they're going to pass someone, they should stop running, slow down, step to the side. And if they're going to be running with the dogs, they should keep the dog's personal health in mind. Dogs need to be conditioned to exercise just the way people do. You can't just like start off at a full sprint without warming up. And you don't want to go too far or too fast if you're not in good shape enough yet. And they should be only running when they have plenty of visibility and be aware of corners. They can sign up for the adventure buddies. They should always be checking in with us. The dog should be tethered when they're in the car. We do have leash seat belts, or they can borrow crates if they want. They're not allowed to interact with other dogs. If they do have other pets that they want to see if the dog gets along with, they need to bring in their dog to do a meet and greet with staff, just the way we would for adoptions. Obviously, they need to be with the dog at all times, should not be left alone with minors or off leash in any way, unless it's like in their yard or in a secure area with no other animals around. Most of the dogs that they're going to be taking out probably shouldn't be meeting strangers at all. Of course, some dogs are friendlier than others, but it's important that they are able to read the body language. I tell volunteers that generally it's safest to just let the people know, like, oh, hey, I'm a volunteer. I'm not really allowed to, you know, introduce the dog to you, but you can, you know, find out more about them, you know, give them best friends information. And we do have cards and things as well. So in non-pandemic times, we were running daytime outing fosters for members of the public, where all they had to do was watch an orientation video and sign up, and then they would meet with a member of the behavior team and let us know, like, hey, I want to take a shelter dog on a hike today. And we would pick an appropriate dog for them, usually like a brown paw or one of our purple paws if it was appropriate. If they were maybe just a dog that had issues with the kennel but is otherwise a great dog, that would maybe be appropriate if the person was able to physically handle them. So it just kind of depends on the dog. You'd match it to them appropriately. And then we would give them cards that they could hand out to people and give them, you know, adopt me swag, just to promote the dog, but encourage them not to introduce to strangers. So for all of our purple and blue paw dogs, we use these acronyms for different behaviors and handling plans, and we'll go into these in more detail. We have the keys to this on the boards, on the Purple Paw behavior board that we have back there by the kitchen. And then this is also printed on all of the volunteer lanyards so that they can always double check it. They should always be checking the Purple Paw board every single time, even if they are familiar with the dog, because sometimes new things come up. A lot of times if there's like a new quirk, we'll just write it out, especially if it's something unusual like Milky Way fixates on hoses. Make sure that there's no hoses dangling in the yard. Or don't take Debbie to the small yards because she gets too aroused. You need to make sure that you're keeping her engaged. Or the dog does better going around the block instead of being in the yard. So we encourage them to always just double check and glance at the board if it's a dog they've taken out before, just to make sure there's nothing new. So they should always be double checking. There
are two ways of ensuring.
So, just curious, can anybody hear that audio? If I play it?
Yeah, I can hear it. It's just kind of quiet.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's a little bit quiet. Okay, well, it's mostly written, so hopefully this is a little better than last time. Last time, I don't think anyone could hear it at all, so this is a little bit better. So it's just a reminder that it doesn't matter if you're staff, blue paw, purple paw, whatever, just because you're that paw color or your staff doesn't mean that you should be able to handle every purple paw dog or blue paw or staff only dog. We have plenty of staff that don't handle dogs that are purple paw. We have a lot of dogs that are people selective, and they may just not like certain people, or they need a lot of time to build a relationship with them. People also have to keep in mind their own personal, strength and physical capabilities. And I tell people all the time, I can't determine that for you unless I see you handling a dog that you're struggling with, and then I can tell you, oh, hey, I think that dog is maybe a little bit much for you. But we always have to keep our own limitations in mind and not have egos or take anything for granted. And so I always tell people don't feel like you have to take out a dog. You should never feel pressure to take out a dog you don't feel comfortable handling. So always vocalize that if you, even if, let's say, as a staff member, it's HT1 time and it's time to take out the house trains. If you're not comfortable with those dogs, let us know. If you don't, some dogs, I forget, aren't good with everyone, and sometimes I forget, and I just think, oh yeah, this dog is great with me, but forget that the dog's not great with everyone. So always make sure to tell people if you're not comfortable handling a dog. So handling plans, these are specific ways dogs should usually be taken out of the kennel or handled. They may have a couple of different approaches. We should always be practicing safe handling techniques. I always recommend that you have a mixture of treats on you, some high value treats, something special. If the dog's allowed to have toys, it's nice to either make sure that there are toys already in the yard or be able to have something in your back pocket. In case the dog gets rowdy, it's nice to have something to distract them with. It's much better for them to have a toy in their mouth than using their mouth on you. Anytime you think a dog's behavior is declining, or if they're getting better, you found something that works really well for them, let behavior staff know. Sometimes I get volunteers telling me that another volunteer told them that the dog was doing something not great. I really want to hear that stuff firsthand so we can address it right away and make sure that everyone knows. It's not doing any dog any favor if we don't let staff know about behavior issues, because it could really put someone else at risk if we don't know about that stuff. All dogs should practice the basics. We want them to keep 4 paws on the floor, being quiet, walking well on leash, knowing how to trade. We need to remember every interaction is a learning opportunity, and that we are preparing them ultimately to hopefully go to their forever home. But every time that we encourage good behavior, the dog's going to behave better for others as well. So it's important that we keep that in mind, and not just let the dogs get away with jumping and mouthing and attention-seeking barking and accidentally rewarding, that kind of stuff, because it makes it more difficult for other people to handle the dog. When we approach training and behavior modification, we adhere to LEMA principles, which are least intrusive, minimally aversive. That means that we want to give the dog as much agency as possible, so the ability to make decisions and control their environment and their outcomes as much as possible, rather than using force or coercion. And minimally aversive, meaning we want to avoid using things that the dog finds unpleasant. This is a code of ethics that is a joint position statement and unified code of ethics across the IAABC, which is the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants, the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, and the Certification Council of Professional Dog Trainers, and the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior. So these are all of the biggest, most major animal behavior and training groups that all agree on this approach. Anytime we're approaching a behavior issue and considering training and behavior modification, the first thing we should always be considering is the dog's overall wellness, nutrition, physical needs, emotional needs. Are these being met? It's really hard for any animal to learn if they're sick, if they're hungry, if they're too pent up, if they're too tired. And our dogs live in a stressful environment, so it's a really important thing to keep in mind that learning is going to be really difficult for them, especially if we're not getting all of their basic needs met. Anytime there's a drastic change in behavior, a sudden behavior change, the first thing I'm going to consider is medical. The ethical thing to do is always try and address potential medical issues before coming up with some kind of behavior modification plan. Even as simple as, say, looking at a dog like when we had Yosemite, our big Cane Corso Mastiff mix. I would tell people, I was like, I don't think it's comfortable for Yosemite to sit. I've never seen him sit. He lies down or he stands. I've never seen him sit. I think it's uncomfortable for him. So trying to force that dog into a sit would not be ethical. And it's something we always have to take into consideration before we're going to try and make the dog do something. Antecedent arrangement means essentially setting yourself up for success and adjusting the environment to be successful. So for us, this would mean maybe moving the kennel to a different location, putting up visual barriers. What can we do to make life easier for the dog? Sometimes this is just what we call like a management strategy. Sometimes that's just the easiest and best first approach. Would be doing something like putting up a baby gate. We're going to address that first, and then we can work on the training, because it's just going to keep the dog from making mistakes and keep people safe. So it just means, making sure that the dog's set up for success. So I think about this a lot, where it's like, oh, I had bad antecedent arrangement. So when I had Roger to my house and I had the garbage out and there was probably something in it that smelled tasty, I left. And I don't think I really left him with anything to do while I was gone. And he knocked over the garbage. I can't get mad at that. That was my fault. That was bad antecedent arrangement. I did nothing to set him up for success in that scenario. So that was my fault. I can't get mad about it. Next thing we're going to do is positive reinforcement. And what's not in here either is what we'd say is desensitization and counter conditioning, doing that in a humane, ethical way. So desensitization means exposing a dog to something that they may find unpleasant or scary at a level that they can handle. So far enough away or very minimal. So showing them dogs at a far enough distance away that they're not going to react to it. And then counter conditioning, meaning pairing it with something really pleasant that they really, really like, so they can start to form a positive association. We would look at humane husbandry, like cooperative husbandry practices in this. So getting the dog to cooperate in their care, that gives the dog's choice, freedom, agency. Positive reinforcements just means adding something the dog really likes in order to reinforce behaviors that we want to see more of. So adding something good to increase the likelihood that that behavior is going to repeat. So the dog sits, we give a treat. Differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors or incompatible behaviors. That would mean, okay, the dog wants to be really mouthy, so I'm going to encourage it to grab a toy instead. It can't be biting me if it has a toy. Dog's not going to be jumping up if I work on teaching it to sit or do a down. So anything that competes with the dog's ability to do the undesirable behavior, teaching them to do something different. After that, we're going to look at extinction, negative reinforcement, negative punishment. Extinction essentially means stopping reinforcement for a behavior until it goes away. So if that would be begging at the table, I'm not going to give the dog any food or any attention while they're begging. The problem with extinction is that it can be extremely frustrating for the animal to stop being reinforced for something they were previously reinforced for. What you get is usually an extinction burst, which means the behavior is going to get worse before it gets better. Dog's going to be like, this isn't working. So they're going to try a whole bunch of different strategies to be like, hey, make this work, make this work, make this work. Where's the thing? So usually it's going to get worse before it gets better. Dog's going to be super, super frustrated. And then behaviors are very hard to extinguish if they have a history of reinforcement, because if you just mess up one time, so maybe you haven't reinforced the behavior forever, you haven't given them any table scraps forever, and then all of a sudden you have a guest over and they give them a table scrap, wow, is that behavior going to come back with a vengeance, and it's going to be even harder to get rid of again. So usually what you want to do instead is move a little bit forward on those Lima choices and think, okay, can I teach my dog to do something different than beg? Can I have some kind of antecedent arrangement so they're not going to be begging? I'm going to give them a Kong in a crate, or like teach them to go to place, give them a Kong while I eat, so that they're not going to have to beg. Give them something different to do. Negative reinforcement and negative punishment is where sometimes people get confused with these technical terms. Negative reinforcement would be the removal of an unpleasant stimuli in order to get a behavior to increase in frequency. So this would be something like applying pressure, say on a leash, and then that pressure is released when the dog stops pulling. You know, sometimes this is just happens without us even really thinking about it. But we really are trying to avoid adding any kind of aversive or unpleasant stimulus, anything that the dog doesn't like. Negative punishment means removing something that the dog likes in order to stop a behavior. So that actually happens naturally in life a lot more than we think, which means I'm not going to give you attention until you stop jumping. Great, now I'm going to give you attention, or withholding food or a treat until the dog stops doing a thing. So that's something we do kind of naturally a lot without thinking about it. But we want to be focusing on what we want the dog to do instead, and really focusing on getting them to do that behavior rather than taking away things the dogs like to stop a behavior. And then the last resort is positive punishment. This is something we're going to use in emergency situations only in order to hopefully immediately stop a behavior, and hopefully keep that behavior from ever happening again. So that would mean if the dog is about to get into a dog fight, we're going to use some kind of startling noise or physical intervention to prevent that dog fight from happening or to stop a behavior we don't like. But there's a lot of potential fallout from using punishment in training. It can damage your relationship with the dog. It can shut the dog down. It can actually provoke aggressive behavior. So I've seen that quite a bit in dogs that have been returned, and they say, well, I hired this trainer, and then you're trying to teach the dog to walk on a loose leash, and then the dog got upset and they bit me. So that can happen. Unfortunately, what happens a lot is that the dog will just also shut down and stop doing anything. But it's not teaching the dog what we want them to do or changing their emotional response. So if someone's using punishment on fear-based behavior, so let's say a dog growls, we punish the growl, the dog's not growling anymore. We didn't do anything to change the dog's emotional response to whatever they were growling about. So now you have a dog that's still feeling the same way, but they're not expressing themselves. And a lot of times you'll see the behavior come out again, but in a different way that's potentially more dangerous. So it's really our last resort, and we really only want to use that in emergency situations. A lot of times people will also apply punishment incorrectly, bad timing, the dog gets confused, frustrated, or the dog, they don't apply an aversive stimulus at a strong enough level that it actually stops the behavior. And so what happens is the dog starts to habituate to this punishment. They develop a punishment callus, meaning that it stops having an effect on them. And so people keep upping and upping and upping and upping the punishment, the aversive, until they could actually be causing physical harm to the dog. And it doesn't even affect the dog at all. So this can happen with leash corrections, pops, any kind of physical punishment. If it's not enough to stop the behavior the first time, the dog's going to keep doing it, and it's going to have less and less of an effect on them, to the point that they could actually be physically hurt. So this happens a lot with shock collars. People will apply a very mild stimulus in the beginning. The dog's it's not enough to stop the behavior, and so they keep gradually upping the shock, and the dog is just habituating to it. It's having less and less of an effect on them until they're actually really hurting the dog. So this is really why we want to avoid this. Positive reinforcement should be our first line in teaching training behavior change. And we need to be consistent about it. This is associated with the lowest incidence of aggression, attention seeking, avoidance, and fear in learners. I often hear a mistimed reward is a lot less risky and damaging than the possible effects of a mistimed punishment or correction. You can do a lot more damage if the dog gets super confused about not even knowing why they're being punished. So we have different handling plans for our dogs. Some of the most popular are just saying, hey, bring a toy. So if the dog is real mouthy or they like to bite the leash, if they like toys, this is great. Much better for them to carry a toy instead of biting the leash or biting a human. And this is an easy thing to translate into a home environment. If the dog, let's say you can often teach a dog, let's say they're reactive to other dogs when they're in the house or to the mailman or someone coming by, you can teach them to go grab a toy instead. And so that gives them a way to channel their frustration and arousal into a more appropriate behavior. We use the peanut butter chuck it a lot. So you can see the chuck it in the bottom right-hand corner there. We'll float it up with peanut butter. And that's really good, just helping distract the dog, keep their feet on the ground, keep them from jumping, biting, mounting, keep them focused on that. And a lot of times they start to learn to anticipate it. They know it's coming, and so they're not even thinking about jumping or biting or humping anymore. They're just focused on that peanut butter, and then they'll stay on it until they get to the exit. Over time, so in the beginning, this is more of just really a distraction. They're not maybe learning a whole lot other than they're not practicing the old reactive or undesirable behaviors. But eventually you can present it but not give it to them, get them to do the behavior you want, and then reward them with the peanut butter chuck it. And you can actually work towards fading that chuck it out and replacing it with maybe just treats instead, and eventually maybe even praise. But in this environment, it's awfully hard for them to get to that point, because there's so many other things to distract them and get them frustrated and upset. So both of these are really helpful first lines of defense. If you have a dog, if this isn't even written as one of their behavior training plans on the Purple or Blue Paw board, but let's say the dog bites the leash, gets easily aroused, is a hard mouther, dog reactive, fence fighter. It's always worth giving these things a try. And if it makes life a lot easier for you and the dog, by all means, like, let us know and we'll add it to the board and say, hey, bring this. This makes life a lot easier for you. Daisy is one of our Blue Paw dogs, and really all you have to do is bring her a good handful of peanut butter on a chucket or a toy, and then she doesn't even think about jumping up and getting mouthy. She used to be an extremely difficult dog. She'd be jumping up and pulling at clothing, biting, nipping. And then once we learned she loved peanut butter, it made life a heck of a lot easier. Do not pick up usually if we have a small dog that does not like to be picked up. We'll make sure that this is on there. Leave leash on in the yards. This is for dogs that are hard to collect when it's time to leave the yard, or they may be dogs that may be more likely to climb the fence, try and escape, dogs that don't like you to reach for their collar or their harness. It could be touch sensitive, or if they're prone to grabbing things or resource guarding items or getting fixated on items. It's nice to have that leash on so you don't have to approach them. You can just pick up the leash and guide them away. No dogs. These are, we can have plenty of dogs that are not good with other dogs or really dog reactive. We tend to reserve this for dogs that are unexpectedly not good with other dogs. So Enzo would be a good example. He's not really dog reactive. He doesn't really do much until he gets close to them. And then he'll like bite, latch on, grab. So this is for dogs that don't really maybe show that they're not good with other dogs. And so we want to make sure people remember to keep them away from other dogs. Go slow. This is any dog that could be nervous or fearful. Take your time, treat them like a shy dog. Really pay attention to their body language. Don't go into the kennel until they seem like they're not going to be defensive. Give them your side, look away, use lots of calming signals. Sigh, stretch, make yourself really soft, curve your body, roll your shoulders, lower your head, look away, and let them approach you. Don't push it. No belly rubs. So conflicting behavior is sometimes like a dog will roll over and show their tummy. Or they may act like they're soliciting attention, but then they don't actually want it. So these dogs usually need a lot of breaks and petting, but some, they just will not accept those belly rubs. When they roll over it, it just means either, hey, I trust you, I'm not a threat, like, please respect it, kind of way cats are. Or it could mean that they are showing you your tummy because they're scared, and we just don't want to make sure that people don't confuse that for a belly rub request. Double leashing for sensitivity. So let me show this real quick. So clip and release the wing in order to get it off. So I'll play that again so you can see it. So you would start off, if a dog has this designation, double leash for sensitivity, you would start off with the clip leash attached to the slip lead. This is to keep you from getting your hands near the dog. So if the dog doesn't like you to touch their collar or a harness, or they don't want you to get near them, you can use that. For dogs who are really bad door dashers, this is super, super helpful. You can clip that slip lead with a carabiner, or have someone hold it near the back of the kennel or to the very top of like the inside hinge of a door, and kind of thread that second clip lead through. Then they'll be restrained when you actually exit. Then from the outside, you can unclip it, the slip lead, and then use the clip lead to open up the slip lead. So if you haven't practiced this before, it's good to practice on a fake dog or on a dog that you have a good relationship with that doesn't have any sensitivities, just so you can get comfortable with this. It can be easy to accidentally grab the wrong leash and open up the slip lead. So it helps if the leashes are different. And it just requires a little bit of practice. So if this is something that's new to you, let staff know and we can show you how to do this. Practice non-threatening body language. You know, approaching a dog face on, shoulders squared, looming over them. This is likely to make any dog feel threatened. I kind of always assume that a dog I don't know may find me scary, or even a dog maybe I do know, they might find me scary, so I'm always presenting soft body language to the dog. And, you know, if I think that there's any risk that they might be scared of me. If I was telling the group last time, I have terrible posture, and it's, I think, served me really well with the dogs. I tend to really like hunch over and curve my shoulders. And I think it served me really well with dogs. I think I come off as very non-threatening. So I think about that when I am practicing better posture, that maybe the dogs aren't going to like it as much. So resource guarding, we will designate a dog as resource guarding food or toys. If the dog guards toys, we have their name written in red on the walking board. You really want to be aware if they do have toys or something in their kennel. You really want to be reading their body language to see if it bothers them that you're coming in while they have that. If we think a dog is going to resource guard toys or something like that in the kennel, we'll usually have a sign on their kennel that says no toys. That's the case for Apollo right now. It says no toys in the kennel. Selena, it says no toys in the kennel. Sometimes they'll have nylabones in there. Once that's kind of not a novel item for them anymore, they tend not to guard that unless they were actively engaged in it. So just be extra cautious with these dogs. You know, if they guard food, we have them as red on the feeding map. And so there should always be a barrier between you and that dog when you're going to feed and taking the bowl away. We don't have any dogs that are so severe that they will say have issues with you giving them a treat. If that was the case, that would be you know, that would be something we'd really spell out for you, and they would probably be staff only. But we have had dogs in the past that are at the sanctuary now that if you tried to present them a treat on your hand, they would bite your hand. So we don't have anyone that severe right now, but it's just something to consider. Yeah, we don't have anyone who's a horrible resource guarder right now, but sometimes the food during feeding time is so arousing, it can be really tough on them. You should always be trading items. You never want to take an item from a dog's mouth. So I practice this with play. If I'm going to be playing fetch, I like to have 2 toys of the same type so that the dog can learn how to drop the first toy before I throw the second one or give them the second one. If you ever see signs of resource guarding, do not try to get the item. Just let staff know. Let a member of the behavior team know. So I tell volunteers, if the dog potentially doesn't want to give up a toy and they have it, just let them take them back to the kennel, and maybe don't even take the equipment off if you think that they're getting tense, if they don't want you to bother them. Just leave it in there and walk away and let us know immediately. So we had a volunteer once, the dog got a hold of some kind of bone, like a T-bone or rib bone or something out on a walk, did not want to give it up. And so they came back and they did exactly the right thing. They brought the dog back, kind of tossed it in its kennel because they felt like, they're kind of tense. This is super high value. I'm not going to mess with this. They just put the dog in the kennel, leash, harness, everything still on it, and immediately let us know. So we decided the best thing we could do is just wait until the dog lost interest in the bone and then encourage them to go back to the cubby, get them in there, safely remove the item, wait a little bit to make sure they're relaxed, and then go in and take off the harness and the leashes. It's just not worth fighting them for it. Even if you think it's something that could be potentially dangerous, then we'll watch, we'll let medical team know. But we don't want you to get bit trying to take something from a dog. Let's say you encounter a stray or a loose dog while you're on a walk or somewhere around here. Stay calm. Don't stare at the dog. Don't try to spy on the dog. If you have a dog with you, you know, you're going to have to just avoid the stray dog and let us know when you come back that you saw a loose dog. You're never going to want to like tie your dog up or leave him unattended to try and catch a loose dog. This goes the same for if, let's say, there's a loose dog on the floor or out in the yard. You know, your responsibility is to the dog that you're with. If you're out and about, you want to walk in the opposite direction. You don't want the dog that you're with to spot the loose dog. You don't want them to suddenly decide to have a confrontation or say hi to each other. You want to try and get to a place that's out of the dog's view, especially with your dog, even if that means stepping behind a car or something, just so that the stray dog doesn't see that you have one. Let's say if you were in the center and there was a loose dog running around, you would want to just get into the nearest empty kennel. You know, if there's one that's like a clean, ready to go, and there's a loose dog running around, I would just go and put your dog in that kennel or stay in that kennel with that dog, because we'd rather just catch a loose dog than break up a dog fight. You want to head back to the life-saving center in the fastest and safest route possible. If, say, a loose dog approaches you, you can at first try saying, like, hey, like, go home, like, go away. You don't want to yell, you don't want to scream, you don't want to panic, but maybe just like a firm tone of like, hey, like, back off, go home. Sometimes will be enough for the dog to just be like, oh, okay, turn around, walk away. I always like to have a treat pouch on me at all times. If it's an owned dog, say, and they're just like, oh, it's my dog's off leash, it's fine, they're friendly. No one will ever get mad at you for throwing treats at their dog. Hopefully it'll be enough to startle or distract them, and then you'll be able to just walk off. You can try spraying the pet corrector or the citronella at them, but be aware that especially pet corrector could upset the dog you're with. So I prefer citronella, and I would spray that initially just towards the ground, like towards their feet, without hitting them. Hopefully that'll be enough to deter them and make them want to go away. Or if I had to, I would spray it like towards their chest or face. If the dogs encounter each other, hopefully it's not going to be a fight. Maybe they just want to say hi and they're both friendly. That would be the best case scenario. And then you'd want to try and just keep the leash loose and avoid unnecessary tension, just like you're doing a dog match. Hopefully they'll say hi and then get along. That would be best case scenario. Purple Paw volunteers and staff, of course, all have access to safety equipment. Volunteers should be checking this out and returning it if they don't have their own. The pet corrector, you guys know, this is a pressurized air in the can. It's a noise interrupter. You can adjust the volume and length by how hard you press on the button, how long you hold it down. You don't want to spray it directly at the dog. It's really just meant to be something to startle them. It should be for emergency only, but it can be problematic because some dogs will actually try and redirect onto the pet corrector, or it bothers them. Some dogs are extremely sensitive to it and they just like shut down and get super freaked out. So you're always running a risk. You don't want to keep trying to use it if it's not working. If you press it and it's, you know, it's like they don't react to it at all, there's no point in continuing to use it. And you definitely don't want to use it in a non-emergency, you know, if the dog's just having some obnoxious behaviors, but they're not unsafe. If you try and use it a lot for less serious scenarios, then again, just like any kind of punishment, the dog may get habituated to it, be sensitized to it, and then it's not going to work when we really need it. So we really want to reserve this stuff for emergency use. Spray shield, it's citronella. It just smells, tastes bad to the dogs. If it did get in their eyes, it's not going to cause permanent damage. It's just going to be a very mild irritant, but not anything that's like, it's not as bad as, say, pepper spray or mace or anything like that. There is a safety that needs to be off if you're going to use it. This is for, again, threatening behaviors, emergencies, off-leash dogs. I've used this to break up a dog fight by spraying it directly into the dog's mouth or nose if they're latched on. Of course, you always want to make sure that you have the dogs under head control before you ever do this, because you don't want to use it and have the dog still be loose and free and then re-engage even worse. So if you're using it to break up a dog fight or a dog that's latched on, you want to make sure you have the ability to remove the dog as soon as they let go. And I've used this to get dogs to back off before. So if I had maybe a dog that was about to have a scuffle and I got them to break it up, but then I think the dog's going to re-engage, reapproach. I've used this before to get them to back off. All right. The most important thing you can do is learn how to read body language. The better you get at reading body language and recognizing what it means and responding appropriately, the safer you're going to be, the more confident you're going to be with dogs. You need to recognize the early signs of stress, because that's going to get you to adjust your behavior to get the dog to be more comfortable, and you're going to know not to push them. You know, we want to be prepared before they get to the point where they're really, you know, giving us big warnings or trying to bite. I had someone ask me recently, you know, were there any dogs that I wouldn't work with, or dogs that, you know, if I was, you know, scared of them or anything like that. And I really think that my confidence in my ability to read body language is what makes me comfortable doing my job, because I don't take unnecessary risks. If I really feel like a dog is in a bad place, I'm not going to bother them, and I'm not going to push it. And that's kept me really safe the last 6 years. And I've never had to get medical attention for a bite. So I've been very lucky. So I think the better we are at reading them, the safer we will be. Dog reactivity. We talk a lot about this in the reactivity presentation, of course. If dog's labeled barrier reactive, it's usually just when they're in the kennel or when they're in the yards. And then it usually goes away as soon as there's no barrier. So Taylor is an example of this right now. You know, he's sometimes reactive to people when he's in the kennel, but as soon as he's out of the kennel, he's usually totally fine. People reactive to all or most people. This is usually on leash when we're talking about this. These are the dogs you really have to be careful with when you're walking them. Because even if the dog is great with you, or that they're okay meeting people in certain situations, they suddenly become very reactive when they're on leash. People selective, these are for dogs that just seem to like some people more than others. And this can be just reactivity wise or just overall, they just don't like certain people. Dog reactive, reactive towards dogs on or off leash. Strong prey drive. These are for dogs that may like really lunge suddenly at squirrels, birds, or other small animals. So if you've got them on a walk, they may be pretty chill and then suddenly see these things and really want to take off after them. We usually only use that if it's a very dramatic response or a surprising response, since I think most of us realize that most dogs will try and chase after squirrels and things. And then we have the consequences of the reactivity, which is really just an expression of the dog being over-aroused, frustrated, or fearful. A lot of dogs will try and fence fight. I just tell people, assume that all dogs are going to try and fence fight when they leave their kennel. Just assume that they're going to do that. Because even really friendly dogs may try and fence fight just because of the arousal and the stress of the situation. The flight risk would be if we think the dog is at risk of trying to get out of the yards or take off in some way. That could be to go to other dogs or just in general because they're fearful in the environment. Redirected bites would mean trying to bite the handler out of frustration or over arousal, and biting the leash, again, out of frustration or over arousal. We really want these dogs to practice calm behaviors, take our time. We want to move them away from those things that are triggering a reaction. A lot of times these dogs will be volunteer yard only, or they'll have some kind of handling plan, like using a peanut butter chucket or giving them a toy. All right. All right. All right, let's see. All right, so it can make your life a whole lot easier if you have good antecedent arrangement and come up to the dog ready to deal with any problem behaviors. So I like to have the leash attached to the harness before I even enter the kennel. I always double check my harness before I go in. I want to make sure it's clipped together correctly, it's not twisted, it's not broken. I always check the equipment before I enter the kennel. And I like to have the leash attached first, so it's one less thing I have to do. If the dog's hiding in the cubby, I wait for them to come to me. If they're reluctant to approach, I want them to be coming to me. I like the dog to be standing when I clip the belly strap of the harness. And I use treats for pretty much all dogs almost every time I put on their equipment because I want them to continue to be rewarded for the good behavior. I want it to keep happening, and I want them to have a good association with people coming in, getting them harnessed and leashed up. I like to move with the dog or wait for the dog to settle or keep them focused with treats rather than physically restraining them. Again, the more restraint I put on them, the more I take away their options, take away their agency, the more likely they are to have behavior issues. I don't want to hover over the dog or put my face near theirs. It's a great way to get muzzle punched in the face and chip a tooth or get a broken nose or a black eye. I like to keep my face to the side, my body to the side of the dog. And as I'm putting on the harness, a lot of times I'll use one of my arms as kind of a brace to keep them from being able to like whip up right towards me. I take lots of breaks. I might have them sit, guide them through the harness or the leash with a treat. If they start to get wiggly or jumpy or excited right after that goes on, a lot of times I'll stop, stand up straight, take a break, wait for them to settle, then do the next step. If they ever freeze or tense up, stop, take a break, give them space. It means they're uncomfortable. If I was trying to put on the harness and I felt like they were getting tense and could potentially redirect because they're uncomfortable, I'm probably just going to skip the harness and just do like a slip lead instead. I'm not going to push it if I think they're super uncomfortable. Maybe we need to go out to a yard first, let them run around, get more comfortable, and then try finishing putting on the harness, pairing it with lots of treats, just so that they can be more comfortable. If you're in the kennel and they bite the leash or the harness or grab it, don't engage in tug of war. Just let them have it, drop it, ignore them. Usually they'll stop because it's not very fun. They want to play tug of war with us. So I'm going to have to work on trading for treats, keeping their focus with treats instead of trying to bite the leash of the harness. Usually they do this out of excitement because they're just so amped up. They want to play. They want to get going. If the dog uses a chain leash because they're a leash biter, avoid putting the slip lead on the dog in a kennel. You'll probably want to get them out first and then put the slip lead on once you're outside. Always double check with staff if you're not sure. We do have some dogs that use a chain leash and we don't put a slip lead on at all because anytime we use a rope leash with the dog or a regular leash with the dog, that they'll bite it and get really, really into it. So with some of our dogs, we can't use those on them at all. We just have to use the chain leash. But most of our dogs, they can get the slip lead on once they're out of the kennel. If the dog's designated as collar sensitive, you definitely do not want to be grabbing their collar. If they're touch sensitive or they require a double leash for sensitivity, you want to avoid touching them altogether, especially in the kennel where they're more likely to be scared or over aroused. If you're going off site, if you're not just going to one of the yards, we clip the leash to both the harness and the D-ring on the collar. You want to make sure it's the part that pulls, not the little ring that's for the tags. You could also use a carabiner to clip these together. I know at NKLA that's usually what you have is a big carabiner. That would be fine as well. At the sanctuary, they have the ends of old leashes tied or stitched to the harness, and then that's the backup that's clipped to the collar. This is just a backup in case for some reason the dog breaks or wiggles out of the harness, then we're still connected to the collar for safety. And then Our rule here is that if you're going off-site at all, you need a clip and a slip on the dog. The slip is not meant to be like the primary walking tool. It's just there as a backup in case for some reason the clip lead came off the dog. You always want to make sure you have 2 hands on the leash at all times. You want to make sure that the collars fit correctly and will not slide over the dog's head. If you're not sure about a fit, just ask another staff member. Don't allow dogs to walk at the end of the leash or go when they come out of the kennel or around corners, because you could run into someone if you let the dog out at the end of the leash when coming out of the kennel. They're probably going to immediately fence fight with the dogs next to them. Remember to keep your distance from people and other dogs, and always clean up after your dog, of course. And if a volunteer takes a dog off-site, we want to make sure we know about it ahead of time so we don't wonder where the dog has disappeared. And we also want to hear about it afterwards. So we have little report cards they can fill out and drop off for us, but sometimes people prefer sending an email or something, and that's fine. They'll send that to the behavior team. But we just want to know how they do when they're off-site. All right, smart leash handling practices. All right. So basically, use 2 hands. Always have the handle of the leash around your wrist and holding on with 2 hands. And you want to make sure that you have your second hand placed so that you can control the dog if they were going to try and redirect or get over aroused. Also close enough that they can't get to other people or dogs. All right. Exiting the kennel safely. Great. Yeah, we have so many areas at our Mission Hills Center that you need to be calling out dog. I always tell volunteers and staff, better to call out dog too often than not often enough. So anytime I think that someone could pop out and run into me unexpectedly, I'll be calling out dog. So even when you're going through like that admissions hallway, just remember that there's medical and cat team members that could be coming in and out of those rooms, or the laundry room or the pharmacy. So call out dog frequently so people don't come out and run right into you. All right. So some of our more challenging behaviors, Door dashing, if the dog won't go back for treats, take your time. Sometimes if you just kind of wait, they'll eventually kind of back off, give you a little space. It's nice if you can reward them for relaxing. It's important to practice this at every threshold, every door, especially if the dog's a really bad door dasher. You don't want them to just be used to shoving their way out, because this is also important for their future adoptive home. If they're used to just seeing a door and running out of it, they could end up running out of their house and into the street. So we want to reward them for at least taking a pause, checking in when they get to a threshold. If you can't get out, dog won't go back for a treat or a toy, or you've been waiting, you just can't get out of the kennel, they're too fixated on door dashing, just wait for another volunteer or staff member, because they may be able to help distract the dog towards the back of the kennel, even just like the corner of the door so you can sneak out, get them to the cubby. They may have to go get a higher value treat or some toys. What you don't want to do is be holding out the dog's collar and trying to restrain them and force them back, or forcing them into the cubby, because they may be very likely to redirect and bite because they're frustrated or scared. If the dog pancakes or is hard to kennel, meaning they just like put down the brakes and refuse to move, a lot of times walking backwards helps. Bending at the waist and walking backwards, using treats, toys, a squeaker, praise, just lots of encouragement. Sometimes changing directions is helpful. So if you just are like, okay, we'll go this way instead, and you kind of loop them around or go in a little arc or a circle, sometimes that can help. Again, just getting another person to be the cheerleader sometimes is helpful. You don't want to drag them or force them in. And don't let them just take you wherever. I've definitely had volunteers and staff before call and be like, help, I just let the dog go wherever they wanted. Now I'm 2 miles away from the center and I'm stuck and I can't come back. If they want to go in the wrong direction in an area you can't go, don't just let them drag you that way. Just stop and wait. You'll usually decide to go in the direction you want to go. Especially if you just kind of face that way. Eventually they'll be like, oh, okay, I guess we're going this way. If we are going to have to physically move the dog, it's better to have another person help you with that, rather than picking the dog up, dragging them. Sometimes we'll just kind of like lift them from the back end a little bit, or we'll get a towel to help kind of like lift their hips and get them moving. So there's a few different strategies we can try, but you don't want to force the dog or potentially hurt them. Defensive handling. So if you have a dog that's trying to redirect onto you, we want to do the straight arm hold. We take the dog's leash straight out and away from our body to the front or the side of you. Sometimes you have to use like 2 hands and really hold it out away from you. This is the best way to prevent bites sometimes, is just being prepared to do this, which is why it's nice to have 2 hands on the leash at all times. If a dog is doing something like this where they're like trying to go at you, definitely let us know right away, because that probably means the dog is going to have to be staff only, blue paw, or we're going to need some new strategies or something to address it. Defensive handling with off-leash dogs, we've talked about this a little bit already. Sometimes if you have a dog that's like say in the kennel or in the yard and they're making threatening displays towards you, a lot of times just standing up straight, looking away, and even like holding your arms out, like, like, hey, I surrender, like, or hey, don't shoot, kind of. Sometimes that's actually, I've had a lot of dogs where they're going to try and go at me or they're making threatening displays, and I just stand up, look away, and keep my hands up and like don't really look at them. And a lot of times that'll get them to settle down. If you try and push back or create conflict, a lot of times that'll make it worse. But if they realize that you're not going to do anything, a lot of times they'll calm down. If I think a dog, if a dog's trying to go at me and I don't have any way of stopping them, I do want to present the part of my body that I want them to bite. I definitely would prefer to have a dog bite like my thigh or my butt than my hands or arms. I'd even rather have my abdomen bit than my hands or arms, just because the recovery on bites to hands and arms is much more difficult and can cause a lot more long-term damage and much more difficult to repair. just because of all the tendons and nerves and everything that's in there. It's a lot more delicate. So I'd much rather have a good bite to the thigh, which will be a much easier recovery than to my hands or arms. Always make sure you have your radio. Volunteers could call the emergency hotline, blow their whistle. You know, you want to get help. You want to try and get something in between you and the other dog if you can. I've used a corunda bed before to help block a dog from escalating and biting me. So I've used a corunda bed before to block them. You can feed the dog something. So this can be the leash you shove into their mouth. Even if, let's say, they were latched onto you, it's better to lean into the bite than to try and pull away. It's much easier to recover from punctures than it is from lacerations. And this is true for animals and humans. You never want to pull away from a latched on dog because that'll cause a lot more damage. But yeah, we've had people really save themselves before by a dog with leash like biting really bad, and then they thought they were gonna, you know, they were trying to redirect, and they took that chain leash and they fed it into the dog's mouth, and so they were just biting and like almost doing tug on the chain leash rather than going after her. If the dog is on leash, you can do that straight arm hold, but you can also use the carabiner to secure the dog safely so you can step away. Or you can loop the leash around a post or a fence to keep them from reaching you. So I've done this before. I was just getting too out of hand, and I had a carabiner on the end of my leash, and I latched that onto a door and then stepped away until the dog calmed down. I've also looped it around a post. Let's say you're on the walk and the dog just gets super, super aroused and they start fixating, trying to bite you or something. Looping that, wrapping that leash around something else and then backing away can keep them from getting to you. A lot of times you're going to be better off getting another person to come and help you take that dog away, because then you can use 2 leashes on the dog so that, let's say the dog was trying to get to you, that person with the second leash can pull the dog back towards them and vice versa. So I've used that before. I had a dog that was just getting too amped up. I couldn't get him to stop. They were, you know, trying to bite me, and I was in the yard, so I just ended up getting them into one of the airlocks in between the 2 yards, and then called another staff member to come out and help me. When we were able to actually get a muzzle on the dog, and then we walked them back on 2 leashes together. I had a dog that just like wouldn't stop mounting once, and the more that I tried to get him to stop, the more agitated he got, and he was trying to bite. And so I looped him around a pole that was out in the yard, and he was getting super, super frustrated because he couldn't get to me. So I ended up getting a second slip lead on him and then using a second person to help walk the dog back to the kennel. But again, you should have the whistle on you, radio, phone, so you can get someone else to help. Anytime there's a new behavior, reach out to the behavior staff. Anytime they make an attempt to bite or they're showing threatening behavior, let us know immediately. A lot of times if a dog's having a bad day, we'll cross them off the board for the rest of the day, make sure they're on staff only. We just don't want anyone else going in on a day where the dog's already agitated. So we've just done this recently with Alex. He had a bad time during feeding a couple days in a row. He got super, super agitated, so we crossed him off the board for the rest of the day. We just said, hey, this dog, he's in a bad mood. He's not had a good time. No more walks the rest of the day. We need to make sure he decompresses, and we don't want anyone else stepping into this until he can get reevaluated and see how he's feeling. Anytime a dog bites and breaks skin, you have to inform staff immediately. So your lead, member of the behavior team, get medical attention if necessary. Anytime the bite breaks skin, they have to do the bite quarantine, and they'll have to fill out paperwork, and this is for staff and volunteers. We have to be honest about these things, because if we don't let others know, then they could get hurt even worse. The behavior could escalate. So it's really important to share this stuff right away in the best interest of the dog and other people. As I said already, never pull away from a dog bite. So let's say it's a dog latched onto another dog or human. You do not want to pull away because that can make it way worse. You never want to try and open up the dog's mouth on your own. We get a lot of dogs that they return to us and have to be in bite quarantine because they got in an altercation with another animal and they were latched on, and someone tried to open the dog's mouth with their hands. And so then the dog has to go into bite quarantine and has a bite on their record to human. To break it up, a lot of times dumping a water bucket on the dog, using a hose can break up the dog fight. The spray shield or the Citronella spray can be sprayed into their nose or mouth. Again, you want to make sure that you have a leash around the dog so that they can be removed from the situation. Hitting, choking, punching, kicking a dog can make them bite harder. You always want to be prepared for the potential of a redirected bite. And you need to get that dog secured and get staff for medical care right away. Sometimes they're so amped up, we may have the dog, like let's say something happened in the volunteer yard, we may put one of the dogs in one of those kennels in the volunteer yard for a while to get them to calm down before we actually handle them. Or you might tether them to something until they calm down. Because sometimes handling them right away after something traumatic, they could be more likely to re-engage and bite again. As I said before, every interaction is a learning or a training opportunity. Consistency and good training, when dogs know that they have control over outcomes, they have some agency, that reduces stress and it prepares them for their future homes. Continuing education is super important. You never know anything. You never know everything, and it's always important to keep on learning. So I really like Kiko Pup on YouTube. That's Emily Larlam. She's a great trainer, and that website pretty much is a whole dog education, dog training education, for free online. She starts out with the very basics of training concepts and learning theory, how to deliver treats, how to time your rewards. You can go through those and learn so much. And she talks about how to teach basic skills, manners, deal with behavior issues, and how to teach really cute tricks. So I highly recommend checking her out. I really like Eileen Anderson, eileenanddogs.com. If you want to learn more about just the concepts of learning theory, positive reinforcement, negative punishment, positive punishment. She breaks it down in a way that's really easy and clear to understand, and she talks about why we take these approaches in training that we do, and why punishment is not the preferred method. She talks a lot about shock collars in there. So if you've ever had these conversations and you want to be able to have these conversations and be more confident about it, you want to understand a little better, I highly recommend checking out her website. I also really recommend Maddie's University from Maddie's Fund. They are free resources on all aspects of animal welfare and animal sheltering, as well as behavior and training for cats and dogs and medical stuff. So I learned a lot about ringworm from there, about allergies, skin diseases, how to deal with these things, fostering, adoptions, all kinds of stuff. So I definitely recommend, especially if you're you know, kind of new, just getting started, starting to learn. There's so much you can learn from Maddie's University. I highly recommend that. And then from the IAABC, there's a lot of articles and online courses, and as well as resources and recommended reading materials and webinars on there. So if you want to dive in deeper, especially about, let's say, like dog aggression, separation anxiety, fear, those kinds of things, more complex behavior issues, that's what I would check out is the IAABC. And then we also do have an online video on defensive dog handling, leash skills, and body language that you can click on there. And that talks a little bit more of like how to handle dogs, like we talked about in here, if you are facing a potential dog bite or dog attack. All right, so that is everything. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If a dog is resource guarding a treat, like from your, how do you, like, what are the steps to solving that behavior problem?
Yeah, so you're talking about more like long-term, not exactly in the moment of resource guarding, or are you talking about what to do in the moment?
Like what to do in the moment.
Okay. So let's say, depends on the space you're in. So let's say maybe the dog has a Kong or something, or a treat. I mean, I honestly would just give the dog space. until they've finished it or lost interest in it, or be able to get them removed from it in some way. So let's say if their leash was still on, see if you're able to pick it up and guide them away. But if they're doing active guarding, like hunched over, growling, like making threat displays, I just walk away. I would walk away and get another staff member, because a lot of times they may even behave differently when another person shows up. Sometimes it's just they get real specific about like, like for whatever reason, I got super freaked out about you being near me with this object. So sometimes just getting another person can really help. But usually I'll just walk away and leave it and let them calm down. Because it's not worth having the fight. But if they are on leash, you could pick it up and see if you're able to guide them away. If they're in their kennel, you could see if you could get them away from the item by like getting them into the cubby so they can be physically separated from it. But yeah, it's not something that I really want to try and fight. So even if, let's say it was in the yard and you're like, wow, this dog is being super threatening, I would honestly just like leave the yard and stand outside and wait to get another person in to see if they can help. Because a lot of times they will fixate on that one person who was with them and be a little bit better if the second person comes in to assist. Yeah, but usually I'm going to try and distract them, get them to go on to something else. If it's same thing, if it's something that they just don't want to drop, a lot of times, like I said, we just take them to the kennel, leave everything on, drop the leash, walk away. And if it's something dangerous, you know, we can try, if they're not making threat displays, but they just don't want to let go of something, a lot of times we can get them to trade, but it's good to have, say, a leash on and someone else there who would be able to be like, if they drop it for just a second, then we're able to pull them away from that item. And then I usually do want to give them something else that they're not going to be able to guard, but like something they can eat quickly, so that at least they get something for being moved away from that object so they don't stay super agitated. But then over time, if you're like looking at long term, you're going to want to just practice trades with lower value items. So if they normally guard a whole bowl, or it's during a feeding time thing, I might start with an empty bowl, or I might start with like a different, like food on a paper plate or something, or just one treat, or just an object, and practice trading for an object that doesn't have a lot of value in the beginning, and then work our way back up to the more challenging item. And keep them tethered while I'm practicing this, practicing tossing treats or something to the side so they move away from the item, and practice those trades in a controlled, safe way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I had a question about a couple of things that, you know, you mentioned that I know we do a little bit differently or that we don't utilize.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned whistles quite a few times. That's not something that we currently use with our volunteers or even with staff.
Yeah.
And I know that, again, it might work a little bit differently at Mission Hills, since you do have like the yard space where people would probably be able to hear it versus being out in a neighborhood where, you know, it'd be hard to kind of figure out where that noise was coming from. You know, more people might react to it from like the public. But do you think that would be something useful to incorporate into some of our safety kits?
Yeah, I would, especially like it's also good to have, if they're not in there already, which they used to be, I think, having like air horns in areas that are like maybe more common use areas. So like at least in the dog play yard, having like an air horn or something out there, and then maybe one in the boardwalk safety kit area would probably be smart. But yeah, having whistles available would be smart. I know a lot of people, you know, they have their cell phones so they can call for help if needed. And we have the radios, which is helpful. But yeah, having the whistles is at least distinct enough that I think that it could be useful. I think for the short walks people do around the block at and KLA, I think, you know, if you were outside, you would probably hear the whistle. But yeah, I personally forget to grab a whistle and have one on me a lot of times. But our volunteers, especially the brown paws, are really good about making sure they have those. And those are used when there's like a loose dog, or yeah, if there's a dog fight or an issue out in the yard. But usually they end up getting used for loose dogs. But yeah, it's not a bad idea for you guys to have those.
Okay, I'll mention that one. The other one was you talked about the fact that volunteers could do some runs with some of your dogs. And
Yes.
again, I know that's one that we tend to really discourage.
Yeah.
And again, like there are obviously some differences just based on the surrounding area. You don't want to go for a run out in front of Equinox or along, Santa Monica.
Yeah, I feel like at NKLA, there's just too many pedestrians and too much stimuli to really be able to run with most of the dogs. I would say that if you have volunteers who are interested with running with the dogs, it should be more of an adventure buddy outing, and they should take the dog to a park or an area where there aren't a lot of people around.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I couldn't remember if that's something that we allow or encourage with adventure buddies or not, but I think that's definitely worth kind of talking about, because I know there are some of our dogs that could definitely benefit from it. Are there any? Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, if you do have volunteers who are runners and that's something specifically they want to do, then yeah, I would make it an adventure buddy scenario and make sure that they're picking appropriate dogs that aren't going to get like too amped up. And because some dogs, if you try and run with them, they just get super excited and they'll start targeting the person handling them. So you want to make sure, or you want to make sure that they pick the right dogs that aren't going to, strain themselves or injure themselves in any way.
Well, can I chime in there for a second?
Yeah.
Hey, I think it would be great if we did implement that, if we did what Janelle had been talking about much earlier in the call with choosing the dog for the volunteer. Because I love all of our volunteers, but some of them get the way that we can also with like, oh, I know that dog's not much of a runner, but like I have a special relationship with that dog. So it might be better if we just like chose the dogs, at least at first.
Yeah, I think that is really smart. A lot of times if volunteers just express that initial interest in adventure buddies, or they say they're going to do it, I always ask them what activity they're going to do so I can make sure that it's an appropriate activity for that dog.
And is there any extra gear that you recommend or ask them to utilize if they are specifically wanting to go on a run versus like a hike or a walk?
I think the same for a run as a hike. I would make sure that they have extra water and a water bowl that they can use for the dog. So it's like if they are going to stop and take a drink of water, they should be able to make sure that the dog can have water too. Because if they're thirsty, the dog's probably thirsty. So they should be able to carry enough water for themselves and the dog, and then have some way for the dog to be able to drink it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We had talked about taking them across the street into that little neighborhood where there wouldn't be as many people, for people to like do like jog around there. I remember. Yeah,
I mean it's an option. That neighborhood is usually quieter, but it is a little tough because there's so many intersections and there are a lot of people still in those neighborhoods. So if someone is really interested in running, I think it would probably be better for them to drive the dog out to an area that's pretty clear and safe. All right, any other questions? No? All right, awesome. Thank you so much, guys. We're gonna work on setting up times where everyone can spend some time with behavior staff, getting to know some of our dogs and working on their skills. And if you have any questions or there's anything that you want to learn more about, just shoot us an email or find us when you're working and ask. All right. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you so much, Janelle. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sorry.